Hey, what's up guys, JayzTwoCents here, and today we are going to take a look at another GTX 980 Ti graphics card.
And I bet you never saw that coming, did you?
Now a little bit earlier this year, we took a look at the GTX 980 Ti Gaming 6G from MSI, but they have pulled out all the stops with the bigger brother Lightning Edition card. Have you been putting off water cooling your computer because you're afraid that you're a klutz and you're just gonna screw it up? Well, that's okay, because EK Waterblocks is launching its brand new line of Predator water cooling loops that feature the exact same components that you would find in standalone custom-built loops already put together for you. So go ahead, check out the pre-order link down in the description, and while you're there, you can buy back your man card. Trust me, you want that man card back. Do it now. Now, the Lightning Edition card has always been built from the ground up with one thing in mind. Can you guess what that one thing is? They even write it on the card. OC. Wait, that's backwards. Yeah, C. Overclocking. Now, the Lightning features MSI's military-grade components, which is very top-shelf selected components to be put on the PCB so that you get the highest quality parts you possibly can in this thing, reducing the limiting, or at least some of the contributing limiting factors of how far your overclock could go. Now, they also have two BIOS on this thing. There's a standard BIOS and an LN2 BIOS, and we'll talk about that as well in this video because I had some interesting results with that. Now also too, because you're talking about overclocking, additional TDP, because this is a 375 watt TDP card using two 8-pin PCI Express powers and a 6-pin PCI Express, like I said, for 375 watt TDP. Yeah, 122% power limit, as well as a plus 50 millivolt on top of the already overvolted core on this thing. Now, of course, just like all other 980 Ti's, it does feature 6 gigabytes of GDDR5 that's running about 7,056 megahertz, which is a little bit faster than other cards on the market. But one of the things that people have had experiences with on this card is being able to not only overclock the GPU pretty far, but also pushing the RAM to pretty insane levels, and we definitely tested that as well. Now, because overclocking cards can get insanely hot, they have a massive cooler on this thing featuring 5 heat pipes and a heat sink that runs beyond the length of the card, actively cooling not only the core, but also the RAM and the VRM, which is very important, because if you're going to increase voltage, you're going to increase the frequency of the GPU, you're going to start exciting all of those electrons, and things are going to get really hot, especially in the power delivery system. So this thing is keeping that nice and cool. Now, speaking of power delivery, it's got 14-phase power delivery for the GPU, as well as 3-phase power delivery dedicated to the RAM. So they've really thought this through on how they want this card to be, power delivered to all of the components. Now, because this card is tailored towards high-end overclockers and like world-class overclockers, you do have harnesses that plug into the back here, so you can get live physical readings of vCore as well as PLL and vDroop. So you're going to be able to monitor things that matter without relying on software, because software is not very accurate when it comes to voltage monitoring. Now on the back here, giving the card more rigidity, because although it's a big giant card, and as you can see here, even compared to their 6G card, it is quite a bit bigger. It's taller and longer than the reference model by quite a bit, which can give it a bit more heft. Although it is heavy, it's definitely not as heavy as the all-copper EVGA Kingpin 980 Ti, but it's still pretty heavy nonetheless, so they've got a backplate on here to give more rigidity. It's black anodized brushed aluminum with the Lightning logo on here, as well as the Lightning Jet, which has always been like the mascot for the Lightning series cards, giving you nice, rigid support. Is 4-way SLI capable, of course. Now, one last thing to mention before we start doing the benchmarks, because I know you guys are sick of hearing about the specs on this thing. Why don't you just show us the numbers, Jay? Just shut up and show us the freaking numbers. Well, I'm getting to that. I want to tell you about their Mystic Lighting app, though, because the Lightning logo right here, as well as these white lines, do light up, as well as being able to be controlled and change the color. The only unfortunate thing is it's sitting right next to a bright yellow stripe. So unless you're putting a yellow light on there, which is by default, or changing it to white, it's pretty much going to be a color clash no matter what. Unless you're like a diehard Lakers fan, you could make it Lakers colors, like purple and gold. Or maybe you're a 49ers fan, you can make it red and gold. Or maybe, although it's not really gold, it's more yellow, maybe you could be like really into Iron Man, so you can make it red and yellow, whatever. So the color is going to clash a bit with that light, but I am going to give MSI an A for effort for including controllable lighting on there, which I think all cards that cost $800 like this one should definitely have. So let's go ahead and put this thing up against other 980 Ti's, and let's see exactly how well it performs.
Transition.
So the 980 Ti Lightning from MSI really didn't disappoint. I achieved over 1500 megahertz, which is kind of a magical number there, all the way up to 1530. Now I was able to complete some tests higher than 1530 at 1545, but the problem was I was getting intermittent crashing, and once you crash, the test is invalidated and you have to back off the clock, because if it can't pass one test of this suite, the entire suite is invalidated. So I backed it off to 1530, and that's where we saw a lot of success. Now I did overclock the memory on this thing, as I mentioned I was going to do, and achieved 8,050 megahertz. 8,050 megahertz at 384-bit bus, 6 gigabytes of it. I saw pretty big gains by overclocking the memory, so that was kind of a big deal. Now I did also overclock the Kingpin memory as well. That was also a plus 500 on the memory for a 1,000 megahertz overclock of the memory. So both these cards are very comparable when you look at the chart on how well it performed. Even when put it up against the more expensive 980 Ti Kingpin edition from EVGA, what I found kind of funny was the fact that the MSI Lightning card pretty much beat the EVGA 980 Ti Kingpin in all the 1080p tests except for a couple. But the Kingpin card was beating the MSI in the 1440p and 4K tests pretty much every time. So what I think that is being attributed to is probably the memory being used in the cards. Now I can't confirm which memory is in here, and I did inquire with MSI. Unfortunately, they didn't get back to me in time before recording this, but it overclocks very, very well. I don't know if it's Hynix. I even searched the internet and couldn't find. I don't want to take the cooler off the card. I don't want to take the card apart, which obviously would allow me to confirm what is in there. But otherwise, I will say that the Kingpin card uses Samsung memory, which is a much tighter timing memory than Hynix. So if this is using Hynix, then that might account for why the higher resolutions were a little bit lower on the FPS. Now when I say lower, we're talking a couple of FPS, which is also well within the margin of error. But these were done on the same exact drivers as well. Now one thing I want to point out is that if you're going to use the LN2 BIOS, you need to know that there's not really any boost clock on that BIOS. It's designed to be full manual overclocking, because the card only went up to 1200 megahertz on the boost, well, on the LN2 BIOS without boost. It just went to 1200 megahertz and that was it. So obviously when I started my test, I noticed that it was getting just smashed by all the other 980 Ti's when we were comparing boost clocks. And then I realized there was no boost clock after asking MSI if that's the way it was supposed to be, which they did confirm. Once I switched over to the standard BIOS, I was able to overclock this thing all the way up to 1530. But what I found funny was I couldn't get past 1500 megahertz flat on the LN2 BIOS, but I could get to 1530 on the standard and was stable. So I don't know. Voltage monitoring showed as well that the voltage was the same on both of those BIOS, as well as the power target. So I'm not entirely sure what changes with the LN2 BIOS. But I do know I was less stable on that BIOS than I was on the standard. So I just went to the standard and moved on. The standard BIOS boosted up to 1418 on its own, and then I pushed it up to 1530, another, 112 megahertz overclock on this thing, and it did great. So that's the MSI 980 Ti Lightning. It's just obliterating games in 1080p as you would expect. If you're running a 1080p panel with high refresh rate, like 144 hertz, then this could be a single card to max out your frame rates and refresh rate of your monitors. Otherwise, if you're gaming at 1080p, again, perfect card for 1080p, 60 hertz or higher. But when it comes to 4K though, this card is still not capable of running certain games at 4K at playable frame rates. I'm sorry, as much as you put 4K all over the box and advertise 4K, this card itself on games like Crysis 3, Far Cry 4, The Witcher 3, not playable at 4K whatsoever. You would need SLI for that. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video and finally got it out so you guys can leave me alone. And I just want to mention to Kyle, Awesome Sauce Network, did a very good impression of me. However, I want to correct some inaccuracies in that. He did not use nearly enough hairspray, whatever it is. I'm way more gray than that. And second of all, buddy, Little Jay's MS Paint server is getting 10 of these, not 9. And the other 4 I have, well, yeah, I am strapping them to my bike. What of it? Got a problem? Come at me, bruh. I think payback might be in order, especially considering I'm sort of an impressionist myself. Get ready for a little payback. Maybe Arnold will pay you a visit. Maybe he will come over and smash you! Smash in the face! That was kind of mean, though. I'm just saying. just going to awkwardly stare at you now for like the next 15 seconds. Not you guys. I'm staring at Kyle right now. Staring into his soul. Ew. You guys don't want to see what I just saw.